What's the best way to beat man marking? The past few seasons have seen man marking become the main way teams defend high up the pitch, fundamentally changing the requirements of playing out from the back. But no defensive shape is perfect, and even man marking has some very specific weaknesses. And some of the best managers are showing us increasingly intricate ways of finding an advantage. So in this video, we're going to be taking a look at some of the most intelligent, creative, and outright dangerous solutions to beating man marking. A few seasons ago, teams were happy to defend with a numerical disadvantage high up the pitch, focusing on compactness and forcing the ball out wide. But as teams became more comfortable playing out from the back, that approach stopped working. So defensive tactics had to adapt. Instead of defending space, teams now began defending players. By matching up across the pitch, man marking removed natural passing options. Every touch was under pressure and mistakes became far more common. And it even raised a serious question: was playing out from the back still worth the risk? For many managers, the answer was still yes. Playing out from the back remains a way to control possession, dictate the tempo of the game, and choose where risk is taken. The difference is that it now requires much clearer solutions, and some managers are showing us exactly what these might be. At its core, there are three main ways you can cause issues to man-marking systems. The first is down to the fact that pressure is rarely immediate in certain positions. Defenders still need to protect depth and keep central compactness, which means certain passes are allowed before the press is fully initiated. Second, the goalkeeper will always be the extra man. The moment you try and rush him, you risk leaving an outfield player free to attack. And because every position is an individual battle, just one defender losing track of their man can cause a lot of issues for the defending team. And third, because players are tied to opponents rather than zones, rotations can be extremely effective. You can drag defenders, distort the structure, and open spaces wherever you want. Every build-up solution we're going to look at in this video is based on exploiting one or more of these weaknesses. And the simplest, most widely used response to man marking is also the most direct. This season, there has been a substantial increase in the amount of long passes from the keeper compared to last year, which is likely a direct consequence of more aggressive pressing from the majority of teams. The main idea with the long ball is to have a lot of players start near the box, and a line of players already in attack, creating space between the lines. Then, by playing the ball into any one of these players, you can often find a simple layoff into the center. This exploits the fact that this layoff is difficult to track, because even though the defender may be in the way, there are different routes they can take. This is a clip from Lille against PSG, one of the most aggressive man-marking systems in Europe. By starting with lots of players in a deep position, it creates this gap here behind the first press. And once the striker receives the ball, it's difficult for PSG to intercept this layoff, as these two players can rotate to be in the line of sight of the player making the pass, and then they're free to push forward. This is by far the most common approach at any level of football, as it's the safest option in case you lose possession, and it can quickly lead to an opportunity if done correctly. However, it can also be one of the most inconsistent, as anything can happen when there's an aerial duel. In fact, in an attempt to make it slightly more consistent, one team that has a pretty unique approach to this long pass is Chelsea under Maresca, with the goalkeeper Robert Sanchez often looking for a low-driven pass into the forward. Maresca will often get his midfielders to move slightly wider and open up a central pass into the forward, who then has more options in support. At times, this low-driven pass can go through the midfielders as well, like we see in this clip here against Atalanta, quickly dragging the defenders out of position. This type of long ball from build-up is arguably something we're going to see a lot next summer in the States at international level as well, given that managers at international level don't really have too much time to implement complicated tactics. Speaking of which, if you are heading over to the US next summer, then I've got you covered thanks to today's sponsor, SeatGeek. SeatGeek have covered everything for this summer's games, and the new format means there are more games than ever. There are already so many interesting games in the group stages, and a lot of these groups are going to be very difficult to call, especially when we get the last few teams that make it out of these last knockout rounds and into the groups. And is this going to be the third time in a row that Italy doesn't make it to the tournament? With over 35 million downloads, SeatGeek is rated the #1 ticketing app, and they've got more than 70,000 events on the platform, not just for football, but even for concerts, festivals, and whatever you're into. I've used SeatGeek for live events before, and what I love is just how easy it is to spot a good deal. Every ticket is rated on a scale from 1 to 10, so you just look for the green dots and avoid the red ones, and every ticket comes with their buyer guarantee, so you know you're getting the best deal. So if you're heading over to the US this summer, I've got a discount for you courtesy of SeatGeek, and you can get $30 off tickets after you spend $200 using code META. This code works for both new and existing users. Get started with my link in the description and the code will auto-apply at checkout. Thank you to SeatGeek for sponsoring this video. So the long ball is certainly the easiest to implement at any level and can lead to some decent solutions against man marking. But a lot of managers want to find an advantage deep in their own half, and it's here where we can see some really creative ideas. From a deep position like this, there are a few principles that can be seen in most teams playing out from the back. Use the keeper, the third man, and stretch the pitch as much as possible. Shapes like the 3-4-4 are extremely frequent right now, popularized by Roberto De Zerbi, but being used by many different managers like Farioli at Porto, Niko Kovac at Dortmund, or even by Guardiola at City as well. The main advantage of this system is that it creates triangles at the base, and frees up big gaps between the lines that can be exploited quickly. The move nearly always starts with the centre-back passing it into the keeper, and as the striker curves his run to close off a pass back to this player, the team in possession will look to go back to this centre-back indirectly through the middle. If the press is really aggressive, then you can often find a lofted pass into one of the fullbacks, who then has space to push forward. A perfect example of the advantages of this system can be seen in this move from Dortmund against Hoffenheim. We see the 3-4 shape at the base. As the keeper is closed down, a simple third man pass back into the centre back, and now he can receive the ball already facing forward. And because Dortmund already have 4 players on the defensive line, they can exploit this gap between the lines, with one player dropping and ready to receive the layoff before moving possession out wide, with players like the fullback and holding midfielders quickly joining the attack, to have 5 players ready to attack in behind. Guardiola also looks to do something similar with Man City, but they'll frequently look to do it on the flank, going into the winger who can lay it off into the midfielder, making it slightly less risky than going directly through the centre. Because of this progression out wide, he will often only keep one player in the centre, preferring to have more players dropping towards the ball in the half space. But this 3-4-4 shape is still pretty positional, and it's relatively easy for a man-marking team to track which player is actually theirs. So what about teams that rotate all over the pitch, making it difficult for the defending team to figure out which player they actually need to pick up? Well, I'm glad you asked, because here is where things start to get interesting. Take, for example, Harry Kane. During build-up, it's common to see him pick up the ball right outside the box, where defenders are hesitant to follow him all the way back here, afraid of leaving a big gap at the back, meaning he often has time to get on the ball and play dangerous passes forward. But we're starting to see teams go the opposite way as well. Rather than having your forwards drop towards the ball, what happens when your defenders attack forward? Spalletti's Juventus showed us this in a recent match against Gasperini's Roma, a manager known for man-marking all over the pitch, not just during build-up. In this clip, just before they start the move, the centre-back Bremer rushes forward. It frees a gap in the centre, and now it's a bit easier to give the goalkeeper time on the ball, because the player that would have closed him down is now nowhere to be seen. There are a few advantages to this rotation. You've removed a dangerous attacker from the opposition, and you've forced him into an uncomfortable defensive position. You also now have a physical player you can aim for from long balls, slowly destabilizing Roma's defense. We're actually seeing a lot of teams finding creative ways of going against Gasperini's Roma this season. Como under Fabregas would have one centre-back play the ball then overlap towards the flank, forcing a change in marking and slowing down the press back onto the keeper. Then, the next time, this same player faked a run out wide and ran into the centre. All little movements that cause a bit of confusion and hesitation in the first press. Now, it's important to note that build-up doesn't always have to necessarily lead to a goal-scoring opportunity, and it could simply be used as a way of controlling possession and starting from a more advanced position. But this idea of pushing your defenders forward is being taken to the extreme by some managers as well. For example, we can see this in what Freiburg are doing in the Bundesliga, or even Como under Fabregas, often pushing everyone except the 2 centre-backs forward on the defensive line, meaning you have a very clear 3v2 game going on at the back, and you can end up finding the free player who can then pass it forward, with one player then dropping off from this cluster in attack to give the team an option between the lines. This might be a great way to move into the opposition's half, but it very rarely actually results in an opportunity. So personally, I'm not a huge fan of this setup, but it can be useful if you just want to gain control of the ball further up the pitch. And we've actually already seen managers trying to counter this type of build-up. For example, in a recent match between Inter and Como, Inter pressed in a 3v3 against the goalkeeper and the two centre-backs, meaning they actually had a man disadvantage in the defensive block. This may seem extremely risky, but at the same time it completely limits the options that Como have in this position. To counter this, Como manager Fabregas had one more player drop to try and create a 4v3, but Kivu insisted that this run was followed to make it a 4v4. And well, this setup might have worked perfectly given the score from this match. I'm curious to know what you think of this type of press from Inter going 3v3 against the goalkeeper and two centre-backs. Is it extremely risky or is it extremely intelligent? Let me know in the comments. So we've already looked at a lot of different types of build-up in this video, but I think there's one more style that's important to highlight, and that's how more relational teams build from the back. These are teams that when are in possession are not too focused on keeping specific structures, but are rather more interested in creating clusters of players in certain areas of the pitch, and exploiting these man-marking systems in a completely different way compared to more positional teams. These ideas are far less common and are arguably much harder to coach, but it could be showing us the future of where build-up might be heading in the near future. A perfect example is what we're seeing from Fluminense this season. Even though they're not as relational as they were under Fernando Diniz, there are still a lot of similar principles in this team. Starting from their 4-2-3-1 shape, the holding midfielder Martinelli will start right next to the keeper, with the centre-backs starting either side in a line. Once the keeper taps it into the midfielder and the press is triggered, Martinelli continues his run into midfield and moves over to the flank where the ball was played. This instantly helps the team create a cluster of players on this side of the pitch, and he's often not followed all the way, making it easier for Fluminense to find an advantage on this flank. If he's followed, then it means the keeper has no one near him that can close him down, and it means they can build their attack more slowly. A lot of the times this means the opposition simply won't press Martinelli, and Fluminense can start their attack further up the pitch. A very similar concept can be seen with Racing Santander in the Spanish second division, led by manager Jose Alberto, who is heavily inspired by relational principles. And during build-up, his holding midfielder starts next to the keeper, before passing it to one flank and shifting over to this side, instantly getting the vast majority of the team over in this position. A slightly different approach can be seen by this Dutch team in the Eredivisie that I'm absolutely not going to attempt to pronounce, which was highlighted to me by a subscriber. And with them we can see a lot of vertical rotations, with the centre-backs passing forward and overlapping, and the holding midfielder dropping and creating different patterns very quickly. This is a slightly more risky approach, as it could leave the player in possession with no real options to lay the ball off, but it does get a lot of players forward and can disrupt man marking very quickly. So man marking has certainly raised the risk of build-up, but it hasn't completely removed the advantages. Whether it's by going long, using the keeper as the extra player, or manipulating space with complicated rotations, any man-oriented press leaves gaps you can exploit.